It's Rebecca Levis coming to you from San Diego, and we're going to study the Torah together. Now, today is one of my favorites. It's the story of Joseph and his brothers, how he was sold and taken down by the merchants to Egypt. And God had him there for a very specific reason. And we're going to see that begin to unfold in this story today. So let's put on our spiritual glasses and look at the scripture through its Hebrew context and culture. So today's Parashah is called Vayeshev, and it means "and he dwelt." We're going to be in Genesis 37 through 40, verse 23. So this Parashah begins where it says, "Here are the generations of Jacob." And yet it doesn't begin with the oldest of the next generation. It begins instead with Joseph. Why? Reuben was the firstborn. Well, do you remember? Reuben forfeited the right of the firstborn due to his sexual sin. Jacob favored and identified more with Joseph. Joseph was from his beloved Rachel, whom he loved. And I'm not going to go into that whole story. What I want you to see in this is the beautiful Hebrew words that are all attached to this story of Joseph. His name in Hebrew is Yosef, and it comes from the verb yasaf. It means to increase or to continue. So see, the story begins with the one who's going to continue this story and increase what's going to happen at the end of the story, and that is multiplying the people. He's going to carry on the covenant of Abraham and Isaac. So it also means asaf. There's another word that's related. It means to gather together. It means a reed, and it's from the Reed Sea, or it became known as the Red Sea, but Yom Suf is the Sea of Reeds. So lots of stories about the Sea of the Red Sea. And in the end, we're going to see how the Red Sea is also tied back to getting Joseph into Egypt. Oh, this is such a great story. So in the life of Joseph, God's voice seems silent. We don't see anywhere in here that says, "and God said to Joseph." It's silent, but we see God actually acting by his presence and his favor on his life. So he's going to have this personal testimony full of prophetic dreams, exotic journeys, political turmoil, struggles with family and powerful people that surround them, lots of different agendas. Boy, this sounds like our news today, doesn't it? So Joseph will contribute to God's plan of redemption through the sons of Jacob, or Israel. Remember, his name was changed to Israel. So Joseph is the Torah's forerunner, or typology, if you will, of the Messiah's identity, mission, and character. So when we look at Joseph in this story, we're going to see him as a foreshadowing of the Messiah. Now, he remained faithful to God's mission, just like the Messiah, and rose to preeminence just like the Messiah, first in the Gentile world, in Egypt, and then the entire nation of Israel, and eventually it is inclusive to the whole world. Though this story at the beginning sounds tragic, in God's divine plan and purpose, it unfolds, I say, like a holy scroll, revealing God's perfect will through Joseph. So the story begins with Joseph having this dream of he and his brothers, and they're all out in the field or the world, binding up sheaves of grain. And it says, "And behold, his sheaf rose up, and the other brothers bowed down to him. Now the brothers heard the dream, and they said indignantly, 'What, will you rule over us?' In their pride and desire for control and their jealousy and hatred of Joseph, they considered that God's prophetic revelation to him was just, they mocked it, they made fun of it. But it was actually God revealing something about the future that he was going to do through Joseph to all the nations. So basically, they didn't get it. So then Joseph has this second dream, and he said, 'The sun, the moon, and 11 stars were bowing down to me.'" Now this is his whole family. The sun being the father, the moon the mother, and then the 11 brothers. Now, this right of the firstborn. Now remember, Joseph is the firstborn of Rachel. And so in his absence, if Jacob is gone, then Joseph will be speaking for the father. And this would be the right of the firstborn. So he would eventually, when the father dies, take on the authority for the whole family. Now, Joseph would also inherit a double portion as the right of the firstborn. So you can see how this is all pointing to the Messiah, who would one day get a double portion. He would come for the Jew first, but then for the nations around Israel. So this is all pointing to the Messiah who would one day rule over the whole world, just like Joseph will rule over the kingdom of Pharaoh. Now, it says the brothers of Joseph, when he told him the dream, hated him the more. Now, I wanted you to see something that a friend of mine, Judith, hello, Judith, I know you're listening. She pointed this out. We're both reading through the Torah in Hebrew, and she pointed out that it said they hated him more. Well, did you know that twice in the scripture, the word for more or to add to is his name, Yosef? And here it is. The brothers are adding to his sorrow, but in the end, he's going to actually save them during this famine. So this is a beautiful thing that you wouldn't see other than in Hebrew. So Joseph was a 17-year-old, and Jacob knew Joseph very intimately because he was the youngest of the older brothers. So he had older brothers, and basically Joseph stayed home with his father. And so Jacob knew him, trusted him, knew he was truthful, and he sent him to check on the brothers because they were tending their sheep. So he sent Jacob to check on his brothers who were out tending sheep near Shechem. And when he came back, he gave Jacob an evil report. And it's interesting that I looked up that word ra'ah for evil, and it's used 666 times in the Bible, the whole Bible. So evil is tied to that number 666. So the scripture says that Joseph's brothers, why did they hate him? Well, they were jealous of him because Jacob gave him the most attention, being the baby. And then he made him this beautiful coat of many colors. We all know the story. So why were they so jealous and why did they hate him? Well, there'd be no reason to hate him or be jealous unless they knew that he was special and that what he was saying about the future was actually true. Otherwise, they just mock him and say, oh, he's a dreamer. Haha, don't worry about him. But why did they hate him? I think they knew in their hearts that what he was saying about those dreams was true. And in their pride, they didn't want any part of that. So the word for jealous here is kana, and it's also the word for zealous. So they were zealous to get rid of him. And boy, it's all tied up in this story, isn't it? So they didn't want to be ruled over, basically, by someone younger. So I call it the pride ride, and you can't hide your pride. Joseph's brothers were furious when he gave the father this evil report. And Jacob was questioning in his own heart, I'm going to keep this in mind. He has told me an evil report, so something isn't right. Jacob sensed that in his spirit. So this is similar to how Mary treasured the angel that spoke to her and said she was going to have the Messiah, that she was going to get pregnant and have a child. And it said Mary pondered it in her heart. Well, this is what Jacob was doing. He knew that God was doing something, but he wasn't quite sure. So one day, Jacob sent Joseph again to check on the brothers, and he went to see where they were in Shechem. Now remember, they had just been circumcised, the men of Shechem, when the rape of their sister Dinah was done. And so the brothers went and asked the men of Shechem to be circumcised. So Jacob knew about this city and what had happened there. And so he knew that he should send Joseph to check on him again. Joseph would be truthful. So the one who was sent to see if they were safe, Joseph, would be the very one that they would actually hate and want to kill. And isn't that again pointing to the Messiah, who when he came, his brothers would hate him and want to kill him. So this is all part of the story of Joseph. So Jacob loved him above all the others because he said, he's the son of my old age. So God knew that Jacob would be mentoring him spiritually since he was the youngest. So Jacob made Joseph this special coat. We call it the coat of many colors. In Hebrew, it's ketonet passim. Now, ketonet passim is a special robe. It's similar to what identifies somebody who has authority or who has some sort of special recognition. And we also see this in the story of David giving his daughter Tamar a special ketonet passim. So it's showing a means of the ruling party. So interesting that we can tie that to Jacob's special coat for his son Joseph. And it would be given to the one who would one day have authority and actually rule over these brothers. And we'll see this later in the story of Joseph. So the brothers had moved out to the city of Dothan, and when the brothers saw him coming, they started mocking him. Oh, here comes the dreamer, and they started plotting on killing him. Now, Reuben, being the oldest, suggested that they just throw him in a cistern with no water. So if he was left there, obviously he would die. So the other brothers are like, oh, that's okay. But Reuben had secretly planned to go back, take him out, and send him back to the father. So this empty cistern is a picture of the brothers, I think, empty heart with no spiritual life in it. Hatred and bitterness sears the conscience and conveniently numbs the mind and emotions. So whenever you allow hatred and bitterness to dwell in your heart, eventually you'll become numb to the things that God's trying to say to you. And they call it having a seared conscience. And so this is what's going on with these brothers. So they sat down to eat, and they see this caravan of Ishmaelites. Now remember, these are relatives of Esau, Jacob's brother, the twin. And Judah suggested that they sell Joseph for 20 pieces of silver. And that's exactly what happened. As it said that the Ishmaelites, they pulled Joseph out and they sold him to the Midianites actually sold him to this caravan going to Egypt. And so he was sold for 20 pieces of silver. Now, isn't this exactly what happened to the Messiah when he was betrayed by Judas? Judas, too, used pieces of silver to sell Jesus to the Roman leadership. So when Reuben came back for Joseph, he wasn't there, and he tore his garments, and he was in great grief over what had just happened. He found no one in the pit. Now the brothers then, to cover up what had happened, they took the coat and they killed an animal and they put the blood of the animal on this special robe. And I'm like, look at how symbolic that is. Remember when Jesus was crucified, they said he had this robe and they were all going to cast lots, and they wanted this beautiful garment that they had put on Jesus and mocked him. Oh, here he is, King of the Jews. Lots of similarity there, right? So they brought the coat back to Jacob, and Jacob wept, and he refused to be comforted. And all must have seemed hopeless and meaningless. Heart was broken. He was the firstborn, and he said, he's going to be gone forever, and I'm going to go to the grave in my grief. Oh, but don't worry, Jacob. God is not done with the story. I always say this to people. God's story isn't over yet. So interesting, Jacob wept, it said, for many days, and the word for many is ravim. And it's interesting that the rabbi said, oh, these 4 letters actually show up in the countries that one day would carry off the people of Israel and keep them in bondage. And so it's almost as if Joseph is going to be in this spiritual bondage. It's a place of grieving. And this is exactly what happened to the children of Israel. They grieved for many days and years as they were taken into captivity, first by the Assyrians and then the Babylonians and eventually the Romans. So I just thought I'd throw that in to show you that fun Hebrew word. So the story then takes a sudden detour and it goes off talking about Judah, this fourth son of Jacob. He leaves and he resents the brothers for what had happened, and there was resentment between them. And so it caused this family problem. So Judah left. And it says there, because of this, he left his brothers and went into Canaan, and he began to mix and mingle with the pagan world. And I said, oh my gosh, that reminds me of the prodigal son, right? So what happens? Nothing good happens when you leave and go to mix with the world. So it says that Judah actually married one of the Canaanite women, daughter of Shua. Now notice the woman isn't named. It just says she's a daughter of Shua. And Shua is this word, to humiliate. So Judah is going to be humiliated in this story. And what happens? He marries this woman. He has 3 sons, and the first 2 are killed off by God because it said they were wicked, and their names mean negative things. You can read the slide later. But Judah promises the daughter, the wife of one of the sons that was killed, oh, we'll save our youngest one for you. When he grows up, then he'll come and do what they call yabum, which is one of the family members have to marry. If one of the men die, someone in the family is supposed to marry that wife and help take the brother's seed and pass it on so the brother can build a family with that wife. Well, he said he would save his youngest for Tamar, and the youngest was Shelah. And he would allow him then to fulfill this duty of the Levirate vow to Tamar on behalf of the brother Er, who had died. So Judah changes his mind and refused to give Shelah to Tamar, perhaps not wanting him to die too, because the first 2 are dead, and he's thinking, well, this is my only living son, right? And where was this son, Er, born? Well, he was born in a city called Lyre. Interesting, that connection, huh? So Tamar realizes this breach of promise and dresses like a prostitute and sits at this place called Enayim, means eyes are watching. This was a place where all the temple prostitutes would sit, and men would come there and they'd get the prostitutes and they'd go to the temple for the pagans. So she knew about this. She dressed like one of them and knew that these people would come to these crossroads and that the women would be there for the Canaanite Baal worship. Now remember, Judah had married a Canaanite woman, and he too was influenced by these pagans. So who knows what was going through his mind when he went there, saw this prostitute, and the Tamar says, dressed as a prostitute, well, what are you going to give me? And Judah says, well, just name your price. And she goes, give me a goat. But he doesn't have a goat. So she promises, he says, I'll give you something else as a down payment. So he gives the signet ring, his cloak, and his staff. And he says, take these and then I'll return with the goat. So he was unable, Jacob, apparently, not Jacob, I should say Judah. That's a typo here. I'll correct it. So Judah was unable to separate his spiritual life from what was actually going on in his flesh. Sounds very similar to some of the things that are happening in our world today, right? So Satan promises us intimacy through sex, and this is what was going on in the pagan world, outside of the marriage covenant. But as we shall soon see, God uses this, the things that we mess up, he can work it for good. That's Romans 8:28. We all know that. So God would be faithful to multiply in the future the generations because of the promise to Abraham. So what happens? Judah sleeps with Tamar. He doesn't know it's his daughter-in-law. She becomes pregnant with twins, and here's their name: Zerach, which means dawn or east. Mizrach is east, and Perez, which means to burst forth. So these are important names which we'll see come up in scripture later, but I'm not going to go into it here. So Judah is told that Tamar is pregnant and has twins. And so Judah becomes indignant and religious suddenly and demands that she be burned at the stake for prostitution. Oh boy. So hypocrisy, that means to be masked. So he's then sends this goat. He's going to fulfill the promise. Now I've gotten real religious. So he sends the goat back to the prostitute, who's really Tamar, and presents her with the goat. And what does she do? She presents Judah with the articles that he left with her. So she uses the same words in front of Judah that were used when they asked their father to identify the bloody coat from their sin. So isn't it interesting? Identify these if you can, please. This is what the brothers said to their father Jacob. And now it's coming back on them. Remember? Whose idea was it to throw him in the pit? Judah was tied to that. So here it's coming back before him. And she uses the same word, measure for measure. What goes around comes back around. So he realizes that it was him who got her pregnant, and he was the father of these twins. So her son, Zerach, when he was born, sticks out his hand first. The midwife ties a scarlet thread around the wrist as the firstborn, but then he pulls it back in, and Perez comes out first. The messianic seed line continued through Perez, then through Jesse, and then King David, and ultimately the long-awaited Messiah, Yeshua HaMashiach. And so this is significant that Peretz means to burst forth, and this is what happened through that line, and the Messiah would burst forth in time and history during this season that we're now in, being born in the city of David, Bethlehem, or the house of bread. Look at Isaiah 11, 1 and 2. And a branch will come from the root of Jesse. Right here it is, from Peretz through Jesse. And it says this branch would be Jesus of Nazareth. Nazareth means branch, and that's where Jesus the Messiah was from. Oh, I love this. So it's all pointing back to Jesus, or forward, I should say. So this act of Yabum, which you do, you have children for the brother who dies, is credited to Tamar's action. She brought about the heir because of her faithfulness. She knew that a promise is a promise, so she made it happen. And it didn't go back to her being a prostitute or anything. Matter of fact, it said she never slept with him again. She put her mourning clothes right back on for her husband. But she was establishing justice. Justice was being done through Tamar. And remember what I said in the past? Anytime you see a woman step forward and do something that you say, well, wait a minute, that seems weird, or why is she lying, or why is she doing this? God will use a woman in a story about redemption. So here's what's happening is God is using Tamar to redeem herself because of the promise, and then to bring about the actual Messiah. I mean, this is just, you can't make these stories up. Look at all the women that had leading roles in the patriarchs: Sarah, Rachel, Rebecca, Moses' wife, Zipporah, Pharaoh's daughter, Moses' mother, Miriam, Queen Esther, Naomi, and the list goes on, Rahab. And now we see it in actual story of Tamar. And then again, we'll see it, the faithfulness of Jesus' mother, Mary. And wow, you got to give it credit where credit is due. So I wanted to show you that Judah was the fourth child of Jacob, And he lines up with the same pattern of the menorah. I've showed you in the past that the Messiah was to come from the line of Judah. So Judah is the one who got Tamar pregnant. And here you see it lines up with the servant. And here it is, Peretz, and then the breakthrough, King David, and ultimately down to the servant, Jesus. First time he would come as a suffering servant, second time as a reigning king. And where is his position? Right in this fourth position over the shamish, or the servant lamp that lights all the others. Remember, Jesus said, I am the light of the world. Look at how these patterns line up. I mean, you can't make this up. This is so beautiful. So then the plan continues. We know the story of Joseph being sold to Pharaoh, and then how Pharaoh's daughter tries to get Joseph to sleep with her. He runs off. She grabs his robe and fakes this fake rape, and then Joseph is thrown into prison. And I always say this is a story of going from the pit to a prison and then to a palace. So Joseph is so trustworthy and truthful about his brothers, remember, that he's been given authority. People recognize that Joseph is unique and different and truthful and dependable and honest. So he's put in charge of everything all over Pharaoh's house. And ultimately, he's going to be in place of feeding the whole world. Oh my gosh. This story next week is going to be even more exciting. So tune again next week. So what does he do? He's thrown into prison, and even in prison, he was accused falsely. Who does that sound like? The Messiah. And so in prison, he was put over all the other things happening, and he actually stayed in the house of the prison guards. So Joseph had God's favor, and God was with him through this whole story. And it says God was with Joseph 4 times in this Parashah. Remember, Joseph is favored by God, and that's the word grace. So grace didn't show up in the New Testament with the Holy Spirit people. Grace is all through the Torah. So Joseph stayed with the jailer away from the others, and he was put in charge. His character was consistent. He was the same no matter who he was with, whether he was with his family, whether he was with Pharaoh, whether he was with the jailer or Potiphar's wife. He remained faithful and a man of character. So one day, the cupbearer and the baker are thrown in prison. Now they're in charge of, there was a fly in the wine, and a pebble was found in the bread. So notice another attachment here to Jesus. You see the story of the bread and the wine in this story. So they were both guardians of the king's bread and wine. And this is the exact story of the Passover, when Jesus took his disciples and gave them bread and wine. So this is coming in this story as well. So what disrupted their positions before the master? Bread and wine. And again, when we take that communion, bread and wine, that's showing us that we are right before our master. And so we're lifted out of a pit and given special place before God. So it's all this salvation story pointing to the future Messiah. So both the men had troubling dreams. We know that Jacob interprets the dreams. One man had 3 baskets of bread on his head, and the other one had 3 grapevines in his dream. Now remember, 3 is the number of revelation. So this dream had to do with something happening in 3 days. And so Joseph was acting like a judge. Both had sinned basically against Pharaoh. But the 2 men in the story represent 2 different outcomes to our response. What are we going to do? Are we going to be restored to the king, Pharaoh, or are we going to be rejected? And so this also are 2 stories where there's going to be 2 outcomes. Would they have been restored or rejected by the one whose authority is over them? So the baker had a suspicious heart, and he says, well, do the cupbearers first. So the cupbearers, his heart was troubled. And so the cupbearer actually wanted to know immediately what it meant. He trusted in Joseph, but the baker had this suspicious heart. And he goes, well, let's wait and see what he says about the first dream, right? So there's always the skeptics that don't have the kind of faith that gives them favor before the master. So the third day speaks of revelation. So God said through Joseph that in 3 days Pharaoh would lift up his head and restore the cupbearer to his rightful position. Now remember, this is the wine, the cupbearer. And where was Jesus' first miracle? He turned water into wine. So here's another attachment, favor having to do with this wine. So Joseph asks the cupbearer, and when he gets restored, the other one, his head got cut off. And Joseph asked the cupbearer, when you go before Pharaoh, remember me, because I showed mercy to you by interpreting this dream. Now you show mercy before Pharaoh to me. And I love mercy. It's the word hesed. And it's also can be translated as grace. I put the website, one of my favorites, HebrewForChristians.com, and you can look this up and see some more definition related to this word. He says, remember me before Pharaoh. This word is Zakar, and that's where we get the name Zechariah. Zakar means act and speak on my behalf. So when it says God remembers Rachel, or when God remembered Mary, it means you're going to act or speak on behalf of someone else. So God said in 3 days, Pharaoh would lift up his head, and that the baker would be hung on a tree. He'd be cursed. So this is what it says. Anyone who's hung on a tree will be cursed. So here's the two stories with the two outcomes. One would be restored, you and I, when we accept the Messiah. And one would be put to death, cursed, shamed. And this is exactly the parables that Jesus used to talk about the end days and the wheat and the tares and the sheep and the goat. It's all coming true in this story. So as we end this portion today, it ends with the cupbearer not remembering or speaking up on behalf of Joseph. And we're going to see this story continue next week. But look at how Joseph fulfilled all these things about the Messiah in this story, who would finally bring peace to all nations, not just Joseph restoring the peace within his family, Jacob and his children, but this is going to go farther. I call it progressive revelation. He was favored by the Father, like the Messiah, envied and hated by his own brothers, sent from heaven to earth to check on the welfare of the children, would rule over the brothers, stripped of his glory. He gave up the glory of heaven and came and put on the flesh of humans, right? Thrown in a pit, meaning this world, and then slandered and lied about, and would judge other people's deeds. He provided food, Joseph, eventually for all the starving nations, and we'll hear about that in the coming Parashah. But he also reflected God's favor and presence wherever he went. Then in the end of the story, he forgave and actually saved the brothers' lives. And then he brought reconciliation and unity to the whole family. So I love this story, and this is a perfect place to end. And I have more slides in this presentation. I'm not going to show them to you here. I put some extra slides in this week for those of you who love Hebrew and want to study further in the Hebrew language. So when I send you the PowerPoints this week, be sure and look at those next few slides that come after that last slide that I showed you here. So if you want to subscribe to my channel, you'll get just these recorded sessions. But if you want to receive these PowerPoints, you can just email me at rjlevis@gmail.com, and I'll add you to my group emails, and you'll get both the recorded teaching as well as these PowerPoints. So know that Hanukkah is coming Sunday evening. going to light our first candle. So at the end of my live class tomorrow, I'm going to be sharing with the group on how you can share Hanukkah with your family and dedicate each night to something different. So Shabbat Shalom and have a wonderful Hanukkah season.